Larry Page has never loved public speaking. I believe his last public interview was 3 years ago. He does have some problems, some health problems right now that have to do with his voice. But in general, what is the view on why he did not show up?
Well, it really depends on who you ask, Emily. If you talk to Google, essentially they say that they offered their head of public affairs, Kent Walker, to go, but that obviously wasn't good enough for the Senate. As you noted, Larry Page has been reclusive over the years, but the question is why he didn't appear at this very crucial time in the company's history. And there's speculation out there that it may have been a strategy that the more they weren't present at the hearing, the more the focus might have been on Facebook or Twitter. Sheryl Sandberg being present, as well as Jack Dorsey. Obviously, that has backfired.
Well, Roger McNamee, longtime tech investor who's been railing on Facebook in particular, makes the point in your piece, Austin, that Google has benefited from Facebook being the focus over the last few months, but may have done Facebook a huge favor by not being there, and lawmakers' attention has now turned to Google. Selina, what harm did Larry Page do by not showing up?
They totally made a calculated risk, thinking that they want to continue to stay out of this toxicity and election interference on social media that Google probably feels is mostly relegated to Twitter and Facebook's universe of problems. However, by not being there, they opened themselves up to endless criticism. You heard Mark Warner up there criticizing Google. Larry Page was even being called unpatriotic. They criticized them for what they're trying to accomplish in China. They didn't get to have a chance to go up there and stand up and explain what they've been doing to combat Russian interference. And I also think it's worth pointing out that Facebook and Twitter won a lot of goodwill with lawmakers by really just repeating what they've been saying over and over again for the past several months. So Google really didn't have a lot to lose by attending, but they did lose a lot by not being there.
Now, Austin, I know a lot of investigation has gone into this story, and one of the big questions is, what has Larry Page been up to? I mean, he recently became CEO of Alphabet. Sundar Pichai became CEO of Google in particular, but in the meantime, where is Larry Page?
I think that's a fantastic question. It's very much the subject of the article, and my colleague and I, Mark Bergen, has spent months sort of thinking about this topic. And the truth is, internally at Alphabet and Google, a lot of people say he's more withdrawn than ever, taking on more of an emeritus role almost. He's obviously not the CEO of Google, so he doesn't have to deal with the day-to-day on those issues. But he's definitely more drawn to some of the technical focus, some of the sci-fi projects going on at things like X, the research lab under Alphabet. But the larger question here is whether that sort of technical focus should take priority when there's a lot more pressing societal challenges that are going on today. And perhaps he should probably reorient himself around those more pressing challenges.
Meantime, Selina, you have Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, even Jeff Bezos out front a lot. Lately, he's tweeting, he's taking on President Trump. Google very much is sort of missing that public face. Eric Schmidt used to do that, but now he's less involved. Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, could have also taken the Senate up on this invitation. So how exposed is Google, given that they don't have someone who's really willing to represent them in public, who is of the stature that lawmakers would like to see?
Right, we're in a different era where these tech company CEOs can't just stay behind their data-centric personalities, introverted personalities, something that Jack Dorsey has very much stood behind for many years. And I think this past year we've seen the executives of these large tech companies really step up because they understand that lawmakers want to see the top decision makers there at the table. And I think at the Senate hearings, it was very interesting to see how Jack Dorsey performed. He was very introspective. Lawmakers really appreciated that over Sandberg's very prepared and sort of memorized comments. And yes, they are a smaller company. They can be a lot more flexible in a way, but he did make some very strong commitments that they're actually going to refocus the entire organization on solving these security and election interference issues. Now, on the other hand, you have Sheryl Sandberg and Zuckerberg, who really continue to reiterate their statements that they're just hiring more and more people, but they aren't hearing true fundamental commitments from that company and how they're going to actually change their underlying business models. And I'm sure if Google had sent a representative there as well, it would have been a sort of same line that Sandberg and Zuckerberg have taken.
Now, Austin, there are some fun details in your story about the fun things that Larry Page is working on. And, you know, one of my favorite lines is this guy who likes self-driving cars and flying cars and yet couldn't make it to Washington. But talk to us about some of his side projects, something called Heliox.
Sure. I mean, I promise you it's a lot more fun than what's going on in D.C. Heliox is basically a project that started a couple years ago, and the only way to describe it is almost a hyperloop for bicycles. It's sort of this large plastic tube that they set up in a former NASA sort of hangar in the Bay Area that was designed to pump air into to propel bicyclists forward at rapid speeds. And they actually envisioned building this thing, connecting it from their Mountain View campus all the way to San Francisco, which is kind of a crazy notion. But those are the types of things that are really captivating Larry Page's attention, as opposed to, yeah, some of these more societal challenges that we've been talking about.
Meantime, Google is now in the eye of the president's tweets, Selina, and you've got the president directly attacking this company. You've got video that's been leaked of Sergey Brin, the other co-founder of Google, talking at an all-hands meeting about how he found it deeply offensive that Trump was elected. And it doesn't help Google's argument when they're trying to say we're unbiased, and yet you have conservative lawmakers saying, how can your personal opinions and your personal politics possibly not affect this company? I mean, you know, Google is sending their chief privacy officer, by the way, Keith Enright, to testify before the Senate on the 26th of September. But how does Google emerge from this unscathed?
Well, it's become a very popular line of Republican lawmakers to continuously berate these tech companies for having anti-conservative filtering policies, content moderation policies. And yes, Google has really been singled out by the president in his tweet, saying that they are unfairly biasing the news about him to all be negative in terms of coverage. But at the end of the day, regulators don't really have a lot of room to actually regulate these companies in terms of their filtering and content moderation policies. They are protected by the First Amendment. So there has been a lot of talk, but there really isn't any looming regulation when it comes to the type of content they're able to show.
Meantime, Senator Mark Warner just said at an Atlantic conference in respect to technology companies, I think there is a high chance people realize that the days of the wild, wild west are over and that there need to be some guardrails, hinting at regulation there. But as we've discussed, it could take many, many years, perhaps, to get regulation in place, if indeed that happens. Meantime, Europe also looking hard at U.S. technology companies. The European Parliament just recently voted to back up copyright rules that basically help the creators of video, music, and other rights holders on the web. You know, what does this mean, Selina?
So Mark Warner has brought up many different policy ideas, and you're right in that it'll probably take several years before any of these come to fruition. I think some of the most pertinent ones that could be more easily implemented is, for instance, a bot labeling tool, which I've heard from sources that Twitter has been toying around about doing for several years. So that is a more immediate possibility. And when it comes to the EU, they have been much more forthcoming, and they've really been at the forefront of regulating these tech giants. And this newest vote is pretty momentous. It would really be holding these tech platforms responsible for copyright infringement. And the EU lawmakers argue that it's a way to help these music artists, newsmakers, creators that have really been slammed by the rise of these platforms that essentially can distribute it for free. But on the other hand, if this does actually go into effect, it would be a huge burden on these tech companies to come up with algorithms to figure out what type of content actually has the correct licenses. And some critics have argued that it could hurt small tech companies even more because they may not have the ability to be able to properly filter that content.